Hello, and welcome to the first official guide webinar of this new year. This is Julie Noble from Kane, Ellsworth and Company, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Before we start, I want to begin by just doing a very brief introduction of myself. For those of you who have been around for a while, you know probably a little bit of my story and who I am. But for our new guides, I want to tell you just a little bit about myself before we get too far into today's guide webinar. So like I said, my name is Julie Noble. I'm the HR director here at Kane, Ellsworth and Company, and I have been here at the firm for the past almost 15 years. I've been in HR for my entire career since the day I graduated from college, so that's been a long time ago. And my role here at the firm is all things HR for our company. Plus, I do have the opportunity to be a resource to our clients from an HR perspective, whether that's to help with training, just HR kind of compliance, whatever they might need help with. And that's a really fun part of my job as well. On a personal note, I'm married. I've got 4 kids ranging in age from 26 to 16, 3 boys and 1 girl. So that is just a little bit of a recap. Again, for those maybe new guides that we have this year, who maybe I haven't had the opportunity to actually meet in person, I just wanted to take that time to say hello. All right, so also because this is the first guide webinar for the new year, I would hate to waste the opportunity to not say a huge thank you to all of our guides here in the AEL program. It's an extremely important part of this Leadership Academy, and we certainly appreciate all of the effort that you put forth to make this program as valuable and meaningful as possible for your participants. Having guides walk beside the participants is really, truly one of the most valuable pieces to this program. Every year after we have people graduate, a lot of times we like to connect with them, take them out to lunch, whatever, and just kind of ask them for some feedback on the program. And I know that so many of them have said that, you know, if their guide is really engaged and invested, it really makes the program so very valuable. So again, thank you so much for being here. As you know, we do these guide webinars to really provide you with helpful tools as you coach your participant to help have meaningful conversations and just really to kind of keep you engaged also in the process throughout the entire year, throughout the entire process, actually. So, all right. So huge thank you to you, but let's get started with a few things. We've got a great webinar today. Today we're going to spend some time discussing how do we help our people do damage control on areas of personal weakness. All right, so some really good stuff that we've got in here. But before we go too far, like we almost always do, we're going to go through just a couple housekeeping things because I know we have some guides who are fairly new to the guide process. I want to make sure that we give you all of the necessary information that you need. And also, honestly, since it's probably been, 6 months or so since we've done a guide webinar, it's really good just to kind of give a refresher. So today's journey, we're going to do an introduction, we're going to go through a few things, and then really the remainder part of the time we're going to be spending on our topic for today. But let's get into just a few things. Okay, so as you know, your participants in the program, they get 8 leadership training forums or webinars, whatever you want to call them, each year, okay? And during the program, so during the course of the entire program, we really try to cover 6 different areas of discipline. So your participants are getting forums or webinars from each of these disciplines that you see up here on your screen. We touch on personal effectiveness, we talk about client management, team development, business development, leadership, and then also financial management. Okay, some of the examples from some of these disciplines, obviously not to name all of the different forums and webinars that they're going to get, but we talk about things like using their time wisely, capitalizing on their strengths and their talents, providing excellent customer service, effective coaching, business development. We talk a little bit about some strategic planning, understanding and improving bank processes, and avoiding bad habits. So again, not to go through all of them because I'm sure you probably have a list of all of the different training forums throughout the whole program, but just wanted to remind you that we really want to provide a well-rounded curriculum that's going to help turn them into high-performing leaders in your bank. Another reminder is at the end of each of the webinars that they sit through, there is a set of questions that we provide. These questions are valuable and they are a great talking point for you and your participant. So if you're not taking advantage of these, I really encourage you to do so. You know, find out when they are listening to their webinar and then maybe schedule some time shortly after. And maybe some of you as guides are also listening to the webinars with them, which is perfectly fine. But at the end, we always have some really good thought-provoking questions to really continue to get you thinking about the things that we talked about. All right, so some recent forums, just as a little bit of a refresher, this October, some of the forums that your participants are listening to, we have a new one this year. It's What Am I Designed For? The 6 Types of Working Genius. If you're not familiar with Working Genius, you should get yourself familiar with it because it's some really good stuff. So, and it would be a great thing to talk to your participants about once they sit through that webinar. Effective delegation is another October one, how leaders help others grow. And then also avoiding the bandwagon. So depending on where your participants are, these are some of the webinars or forums that they are getting, either have gotten already or will be getting yet in the month of October. Just wanted to point those out to you in case you were curious, maybe. A couple other things here as far as the forums are involved. Please remember that participants need to share with you what they learn from each forum and what they're going to do as a result. Obviously, the emphasis is on listening to learn, and then learning to do, and doing to become. So again, talking through how valuable it is for you to make sure that you're talking to them each and every month about what they're getting out of those webinars. Then let's talk just a little bit about goals, okay? So after each forum, after each monthly webinar, they should establish a goal that relates to what they learned in that webinar. We give them some ideas, which they can certainly use, or they can certainly come up with something on their own. So these are small, short, pretty easy little goals that they should be able to complete within 30 days by the time they have listened to the webinar before the next webinar is scheduled. Okay, and I would really encourage you to encourage them each month to develop these goals, write them down, and do the monthly goals. They don't have to be overly complicated, and honestly, they should not be overly complicated, but they should stretch them into that area that we discussed. They should be appropriate, try to play to their strengths if possible. And it's really these goals that are going to reinforce what they're learning with each monthly training forum, okay? So just to remember about those goals. I guess another reminder here, you know, calendaring them is definitely a thing that will help them make sure that they're accomplishing these goals. Sometimes it sounds like it's such a small thing, but it really can be a very significant step to getting these things done. We all know, I'll be the first to admit too, that if we wait until the 11th hour, we usually end up doing things maybe at a level, maybe 3, 4, 5 out of 10. But we really want those goals to be done at a higher level, 8, if not higher. But that means we need to be deliberate and diligent about spending time on them. So again, I don't want to preach. I'm not trying to harp. I just think that, it's such a big part of the program that we need to make sure that these things are happening. All right. And then we've got those small goals like we just talked about. Then we've got the project. And again, for some of you who've maybe been in the program for a while, you know the drill, you get it. So I'll continue to roll through this, but every participant should have one leadership project each year. And this is a bigger project, right? The guidance that we give on projects is that they should really stretch the participant. They should obviously be specific. They should benefit the bank. They should be measurable, have a time frame, kind of all those typical things when you think about having a goal or having a project. What we'd like to say is that we anticipate that these projects should probably take about, or I would say not even about, probably at least 10 hours of work. And so you, as the guide, are there to help them select a meaningful project if they need help, maybe something that you can talk to them about. And then also, obviously, to be there to guide, coach, maybe troubleshoot with them as they work on and complete the project. So here we are in October. It really is important if your participants haven't selected a project yet. I know we're fairly early in the year right now, that they do so pretty quickly, because we all know how soon the year can kind of roll on, right? The weeks go fast, the months go fast, and all of a sudden here we are and we're getting closer to the end of the year. So maybe check with them, ask them if you don't know if they have established what their project is going to be. And I must tell you too, at the end of each year, it is always so great for us to hear what they did, how it benefited the bank, and the value that it added to the bank as well as to the individual. So often it really drives home all the work that they've done throughout the course of the year. So the projects are a big deal. Like I said, if you don't know for sure where your participants are at, maybe check in with them, maybe help them brainstorm, come up with an idea of something that would be a great project for them this year. All right, and then just one more here before we get started with today's topic. We just wanted to make sure that you are fully aware of the guide webinars that will be happening this year, as in kind of this school year, I guess I would say. The guide webinars are always live at 10 a.m. Obviously today, we are talking about helping your participant do damage control on areas of personal weakness. Then in February seems like a long ways away, but we know it'll be here before you know it. We're going to be talking about helping your participant to become a better trusted advisor. And then the last guide webinar of this year is going to be helping your participant become a recognized expert. So we really hope that you get a lot of value out of these guide webinars. But as always, if there's ever anything that we can do for you as a guide, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We know this is a big investment for your bank. This is an investment of your time as well. And so again, if there's anything that we can do to help, we are happy to do that. All right, so that's all my introductions or all my housekeeping things, I should say. So we are going to spend the next portion of our time together really digging into our topic today, and that's doing damage control on areas of personal weakness. For some of you who have maybe been in the program for a while and have been guides for a while, you have already kind of gotten the sister to this webinar or the front end to this webinar, which talks more so about strengths. However, it doesn't matter if you've gotten that webinar or not. There's no particular order with what we're going to be talking about today. Kind of the back end of that is we all know that it's important that we play to our strengths and we spend the most amount of time that we can really understanding our strengths. However, we cannot ignore that we have to address kind of the other side of that coin, which is areas of personal weakness. Okay. So we're going to be talking through that today. We're going to really be focusing on the importance of this. It's important to understand kind of what maybe a good ratio of strengths to weaknesses might be. And you've probably heard this before too, but a lot of times we like to say that ratio should be probably 4 to 5 to 1. And so what that means is when you're talking about coaching or mentoring or guiding, you know, out of your interactions, out of the time spent, like 4 to 5, the ratio of 4 to 5 events or instances to 1 should be spent on strengths to weaknesses. Okay. We all know that we're always probably going to advance further in our career if we play to our strengths than if we spend so much of our time doing damage control on our weaknesses. But because it is important, we're going to spend some time talking about that today. And we're going to spend some time on helping you figure out, okay, how do I help my participant do this? Okay, so that is where we are going to focus our time today. It says here, a personal weakness is anything that limits our ability to reach our potential. These personal weaknesses are patterns or behaviors that automatically come into play in our lives. Okay, so the fact that these weaknesses are patterns, the word patterns, is really kind of the key point that we're going to hit on here. These things, they kick in, they kind of go on autopilot, and unfortunately, they often tend to hold us back. And a lot of times, we don't really realize what those things are without the help of others. We might know. I mean, it depends kind of on how self-aware we are, right? Or how much we actually want to admit that we have those weaknesses. But that's where you as guides come in to help your participants recognize when these patterns occur. And I just want to throw out there, this can obviously be done very tactfully, very diplomatically, right? This isn't like, oh, we're gonna make sure that you understand all of the areas that you really stink. No, that's not what we're talking about here. There are ways, and we're going to talk about that as we move through today, that we can do that. So as we're talking about weaknesses, a lot of times weaknesses can also be referred to in a number of different ways. Maybe they're limiting habits, maybe they're negative patterns, irritating anchors, excessive baggage, unwanted distractions, or weakening activities. However you want to think about that, that's what we're talking about today. Before we go into this too deeply, however, we want to talk a little bit about bench strength, because I think that's very relevant to what we're talking about today when we're talking about strengths and weaknesses and looking at your participants and helping them understand what their strengths are and also kind of what those weaknesses are. So perhaps you're aware of kind of this term called bench strength. Maybe you have heard of it, maybe you're very familiar with it, maybe you're like, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. Well, we're gonna fill you in here a little bit. So the bench strength exercise is really pretty simple, and honestly, there's lots of different ways. There's not necessarily any right or wrong way that you can identify kind of what your bench strength is. It's kind of whatever works best for your organization. But what it is it's basically just whatever method you want to do, whatever method you want to use in order to identify kind of who your key individuals are on your team, who might be some of your next level leaders, maybe your rising stars, your rock stars, whatever you want to call them. And then once they're identified, then for each of those individuals, you list out kind of what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. Why are they maybe ready to move into a new role, or maybe why are they not ready to move into a new role, and potentially maybe what's holding them back. So I did just a little bit of AI research before our webinar today, just to kind of dig into this thought process of bench strength a little bit more. And like I said, it really can help organizations identify high potential employees, prepare them to step into key positions when needed. A couple of the things that it says here is it really is kind of a proactive approach to whether you want to call it succession planning or just, being prepared. So this is a great exercise for you to do in your bank and be proactive about who do I have on my team? Where might I have gaps? Who might be able to fill those gaps? Are they ready to fill those gaps? Are they not ready to fill those gaps? Um, so it really kind of helps you create kind of a visual map of your current roles and potential successors. So this is something as we kind of continue to talk through this, I want you to think about if you haven't done this before, maybe this would be a really good exercise for you to do. But as we continue to think about bench strength, what we've got here on the next few slides are as you're identifying those strengths and weaknesses, sometimes it's hard to even just put terms or to put words together to think about, okay, what are some of those things that I could potentially kind of assess my people on? So we've got about, I think it's 2 or 3 slides here with just a list of kind of some perceived weaknesses. And so if you decide that doing a bench strength exercise is something that you would want to do, or maybe you've done it before and maybe want to do it a little bit differently, here's just maybe a good list of some things that can help you kind of identify and take a look at your people. I'm not going to read through all of these, but how do they do on confidence, making good use of their time? Are they a good communicator? Are they somebody who cracks under pressure? The next one, let's see here. Are they a chronic complainer? Do they need help with writing skills? Do they lack ambition? One more, maybe they're too much of a perfectionist. Do they seem to kind of be a know-it-all? Do they just need more experience? So here is just maybe a helpful list that you maybe could use and go back to if you wanted to kind of think through your people and kind of do that bench strength exercise. So, all right, so we talked about that a little bit, but now let's walk through some observations regarding weaknesses. These are just going to be kind of some basic observations that are going to continue to get you thinking about your people and how can we help them identify what these weaknesses might be. What it says here is that every one of us has a combination of strengths and weaknesses, and we know that. Some weaknesses are more obvious and or more irritating than others, and we are often willing to talk about an individual's weaknesses to everybody but that individual. So there's a few things on this slide that I want to just kind of touch on, right? We all have our own combination. We're all unique. Nobody is exactly the same, right? And the second point here where it talks about how some weaknesses are more obvious and or more irritating than others, I think we can all absolutely agree to that too, right? When we think about maybe somebody comes to the top of your mind, but when we think about some weaknesses, I would probably agree that if somebody's weakness was that they were a chronic complainer or that they were lazy or maybe arrogant, highly irritating, some of those weaknesses definitely to me fall pretty high on the radar screen. Those are sometimes the types of things that are going to hold people back versus maybe a weakness where maybe somebody's perceived weakness is that they maybe just aren't a great public speaker or they just really need more experience. Those are maybe not as obvious or less irritating than others. So I think you understand what we're trying to say here. And definitely, I think maybe you would agree, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know, but the last sentence here says, we're often willing to talk about an individual's weaknesses to everybody but that individual. I've fallen short there, probably not proud to admit it, but it seems like it's so much easier for people to talk to somebody else about where somebody falls short than to actually have that conversation with them. And think about why is that? Well, I think some reasons is because those conversations always feel like those aren't easy conversations to be had, right? but why are we not open and honest with that person? I think we just need to do better with that in general. So another observation, I want to know what you think about this as I read this. It says, generally, individuals are promoted because of their strengths and passed up for promotions because of their weaknesses. While we don't usually turn weaknesses into strengths, we can do damage control on weaknesses. So do you agree with that statement? When you think about individuals are promoted because of their strengths and passed up for promotions because of their weaknesses? Maybe you can even think of in your organization where that was absolutely true. Maybe not. I guess just give that some thought. So if that is possible, that people are passed up for promotions because their weaknesses, then this really is important, right? That we're touching on this, that we're talking about this with our participants, and that we're helping them identify these. All right, another observation. It's difficult to know the full impact of our weaknesses on others without their open and honest feedback. Too many banks allow and even promote the existence of artificial harmony, which provides the perfect setting to keep our weaknesses tucked away, conveniently out of sight and out of mind. This is a big one, if you ask me, right? Because I think we all can have blind spots. And sometimes it's only through others that sometimes we then can begin to see how our weaknesses really impact the organization, how they impact other people. And sometimes by hearing somebody else speak that to us and say that to us, that's really where the change can happen and where the difference, what makes a big difference. And unfortunately, and I don't think that anybody that I'm talking to today, or even our organization here, can disagree that it doesn't seem like we have cultures that are as open and honest as they ought to be. We aren't having enough of those open, honest dialogues. So how do you feel about that in your bank? How do you feel about, are you in an organization that maybe provides a little too much artificial harmony? Or do you feel like you're pretty good at giving some open, honest feedback? Think about your participant. When is the last time that you gave them, let's just say, or maybe anyone, some honest feedback on their area of weakness? So think about that. And when's the last time someone gave that feedback to you, right? None of us are perfect. I think we all have areas. When's the last time somebody maybe gave that feedback to you as well? So just, again, some food for thought questions. All right, so what are some barriers to minimizing weaknesses? Okay, what are some reasons? What are these barriers to why we tend to not do this? So it says here that the law of normalcy tries to return everything to a state of status quo ASAP. It's too easy to say, that's just the way I am. We often feel we're simply too busy to address our weaknesses, knowing it will take some concerted effort to make any noticeable change. So again, if it were easy, we probably would not be sitting here talking about this and having a webinar on this very topic. And it isn't easy. We know that. I think that a lot of times it's easy for people to say, you know what, I'm doing all right. I've done a good job in my career. I've been promoted. I feel good about where I'm at. I've gotten this far, right? I've been pretty successful. How hard do I really need to work on my weaknesses? I think that they're pretty under control. Nobody ever really talks to me about them. I don't see that there are these big glaring red flags, right? I would say that that's probably some self-talk that we definitely have with ourselves. And I do agree that sometimes, we use the busyness excuse, right? And definitely the further we get up the ladder or the chain, it's definitely easier to say, I'm just so busy. Like I got stuff to do. Like people depend on me. I mean, I got a lot of responsibility, right? And we all know that it takes time and effort to really work on changing some of those weaknesses. So whether we say I'm good, and that's why I don't need to work on them, or you know what, I just don't have time for this, those are definitely some barriers. What else? Some other barriers to minimizing our weaknesses. It says here on the slide, it says others who know our weaknesses continue to view us in the same light, regardless of the changes that we make. Too often, we fail to understand how others view us and our weaknesses. And even if we understand and accept some of our weaknesses, we often don't know what we should do to change them. So, kind of an example I want to give of what we're saying here is as a barrier to minimizing our weaknesses. I do think that sometimes people might say, you know what, even if I really feel like I'm really trying to work on these and I'm really trying to change, people are still going to view me that way. Is anybody going to really notice? Am I still always going to be perceived in that way? And I have a kind of a good example of this. Um, I was working with a client and they had an employee who was, I mean, a good employee, but definitely was like an 8, 9, or 10 on the chatter ladder, if you know what I mean. Like definitely extrovert, loved to have a lot of chatter. Was just a very social guy. Sometimes, you know, filter maybe wasn't always the best, and was just definitely known for like always going to kind of be the guy to probably talk about 5, 10, 15 minutes longer at a break or in the break room or before the start of the day or whatever than he should. And this particular employee was really trying to, you know, continue to get promoted, be seen as a leader in the organization, and just kind of was like always thought of as, oh, you know, the first thing that came to mind for this employee was just that they're just a talker. So we sat down and we had some really open, candid conversations with that person, and they understood and they knew that. And so they really tried to do some of their own damage control on that and really tried to zip it up, limit the talk, you know, while still, you know, being themselves, right? And and had a noticeable difference and was doing a really good job with that. However, it still was something that kept always coming back up in feedback meetings and on performance reviews. And they were like, you know what? Am I just always going to be seen as that guy? And so I guess where I'm going with that story is sometimes that can be a barrier to even wanting to work on those weaknesses. So if you have something like that example in your organization and you see that somebody is really trying to do better and work on minimizing that and work on that, acknowledge that and thank them for that and say that you notice those things, because I think that that's really important. It says here that we're far more supportive of overcoming our personal weaknesses than we are committed to really working on them. Working on weaknesses is hard work. We talked about that. We may feel our strengths are so overwhelmingly positive and powerful that they overshadow our weaknesses, right? I mean, like how many of us don't think that? It's kind of what I was just talking about. Like, you know what? I do a pretty good job. People think I'm a pretty good, you know, worker, employee. I've been promoted. I've kind of climbed the ladder. I've done a lot of good things, right? So my weaknesses really must not be holding me back too much. And for some people that might be true. That doesn't mean that we don't maybe have some things that we need to continue to work on. And as it said at the beginning of this slide, we're far more supportive of overcoming our weaknesses than we are committed to working on them. What that means is, yeah, I hear you. I know what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, but how committed am I to really doing the work, right? So I think we would all kind of understand that. All right, so the next few slides here that we're going to talk about, probably from here until about the end. So now what? Okay, we understand what we're talking about here. We made some pretty good general observations. We know that we need to help our participants, especially if you have people in your bank, whether it's your participant or whoever, that you're like, I see this is holding them back. If you have that or know that or see that, then we need to do our job to do what we can do to help with that. So as it says here are some thoughts and ideas on how you can help the individual you guide to perform some damage control on areas of personal weakness. So we're going to work through, I think I've got 5 of them, 5 specific things that you can do to help with this process. All right, number 1, get a commitment to improve. Honestly, in order to get a commitment to improve, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to have a conversation, right? We need to have a conversation, and it's easy to have a conversation with your participants about this because they have probably already had this in one of their webinars, and if not, they will be, depending on where they are in the program. So this is not either new, or if it is new, it's something that we're going to be talking about more in the program. So it's very relevant to sit down with them and have a conversation. Help them commit, help them understand. Like, we're not sitting down trying to, pick apart all of your flaws. That is not what this is about, right? What we want to do though is get a commitment from them to understand, hey, we all have weaknesses. And what I want to do is I want to help figure out what those are if they're not glaringly obvious, right? And then figure out how we can work on these together. So there's a quote here on the slide as well from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It says, "We acquire the strength we have overcome." I like when there's quotes here to dig into these just a little bit deeper. And so I did a little bit of research on this too. And basically what this quote reflects is Ralph Waldo Emerson's belief in self-reliance and personal growth through adversity. And what he's saying is that, strength isn't given, it's earned. We don't become strong by avoiding difficulty. We become strong by facing it. Overcoming challenges builds our character. Each obstacle we conquer adds to our resilience, wisdom, and emotional fortitude. And struggle is transformative. The process of overcoming hardship reshapes us, making us more capable and confident. All of these things that he's saying here lead to exactly what we're talking about. This is hard stuff, right? But this is what's going to help transform us. So, good quote there. Another quote here by David Maister. We talk a lot about David Maister, great author. Says here that all professionals should be expected to have a personal career strategy for making themselves continually more valuable in the marketplace. So again, a great way and a great reason to sit down with your participant and say, you know what, we all should have kind of our own strategy for making ourselves continually better, right? One of the goals that we should have is to get better every year. And you've probably heard this before, the participants have heard this before, but it's a great place to kind of throw this in there. I know here at our firm, every year when we do our annual performance reviews, one of the questions on our annual performance review is think about yourself 1 year ago today versus where you are today. What have you done? What have you done better? What have you done more of? What have you done that you had never done before? Always trying to move that dial. So this is a great way to say, okay, what is your personal strategy for getting better, which definitely could be using your strengths, but also identifying and minimizing those weaknesses. All right. Your participants need to sincerely believe that they will have greater success in their career and probably life if they do damage control on areas of personal weakness. That could be definitely in their professional life as well as in their personal life, right? We should all view our weaknesses as anchors that inhibit our progress. Our goal and desire should be to cut them loose or minimize their negative pull in our lives. Thinking about climbing a mountain, climbing uphill, and you have this anchor tied around your ankle, whatever that weakness is, it's tied around your ankle. And it is prohibiting us to get to where we want to be. Again, whether that's personal, professional, whatever it might be. All right, so that was number one. Number two, right, is probably honestly one of the most important steps. It's identifying, and probably can be some of the hardest. Maybe not for everybody. For some people, you might be, oh no, I can easily help this person identify what some of their weaknesses might be because they're glaring, whatever it might be. But the second step is to really help them identify. You may need the help of others to openly and honestly identify your participant's personal weakness. Maybe it's not just you and your thoughts. The right questions to ask will be a vital step in identifying personal weaknesses. Okay, so, and I do think when you're sitting and having these conversations and identifying what these weaknesses might be, it's always a good idea to give a specific example if you can, to try to be as clear as you possibly can. I love this concept that we talk about on this slide. It says labeling your weaknesses gives you the ability to recognize them when they cut in for a dance and put you on auto habit pilot. With that awareness, you can be accountable for shifting them from active duty to being shut down, turned off, dismantled, and relieved of duty. So what do I love about this concept? Like, I feel like I have really used this concept as I kind of can self-identify, or other people have helped me and told me maybe what some of my areas of weakness are. You start to label them and you're like, oh, Julie, this is where you don't listen and you come in with a rebuttal too quickly before someone is done giving their entire thought. I'm either maybe just pulling that out of the sky, or maybe that is an area you can think what you want, but, or, oh, this is where I really have something to add to the conversation in a meeting, but I don't always feel comfortable speaking up in front of other people, so I'm just going to keep my thoughts to myself, and then later wish that I had said something, right? So we start putting those labels on the things that we have identified, and then we recognize them. Like, oh, this is it. This is what I'm talking about, right? When they start to happen, or they just come in autopilot like we talked about. And when we start to become more aware and we label those things and those flags come up, when we see those things happening, we can shut them down, or we can do better. We can speak up when we normally wouldn't speak up. We can let the person that we're talking to finish their thought before we right away jump in with what we want to say. So I love using this tool and sitting down and maybe going through this tool with your participant to help them recognize when those things are happening as well. All right, here is a quote. It says, "The acknowledgement of our weakness is the first step in repairing our loss." The quote is by Thomas Kempis. And if you're not familiar with Thomas Kempis, he was a 15th century kind of Christian mystic. He believed that, progress begins with honest introspection, which makes sense with this quote, right? It says here, the acknowledgement of our weakness is the first step in repairing our loss. His thoughts were, true strength begins with vulnerability. By acknowledging where we've fallen short, we open ourselves to learning, forgiveness, renewal. So I think we can think about this, whether in leadership, personal development, whatever it might be, that acknowledging weakness is often the first step to change. And it's a reminder that healing or getting better doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with honesty and being honest with ourselves. All right, so we're talking about identifying, right? And we talked a little bit about asking the right questions. So we've got a list here of, here are some questions that you can ask your participant if you're having this conversation with them, maybe struggling with kind of identifying what these weaknesses might be. Some questions like, what are the things that no matter how hard you try, you just cannot master? What things do you find yourself procrastinating? It's a good one. What are the things you do only because you should do them, not because you feel like you're maybe good at doing them? What activities deplete your energy? All right, so some good questions to ask your participants. And then maybe some questions to ask others, because like we said a few slides ago, it might not just be you. You might also need to ask others, right? Might need to do a little bit more, investigating, fact finding, whatever it is to really help your participant. So some questions that you could ask others are, what do you feel are the personal anchors that hold this person back? Maybe it's somebody that's, worked with this person for a while, works in the same department, in the same area. In what ways do they irritate or frustrate people? I mean, are there just some really bad habits that people just can't get past? Maybe they technically or whatever, they're really smart, they do a good job, but just have some irritating habits that fortunately or unfortunately or whatever it might be are holding them back. And what are their limiting habits that seem to take over at times? So again, some good questions that you can ask your participant as well as ask others. All right, step number 3 then is develop a written plan. I think we all know that when we write things down, it means so much more. And it honestly doesn't make sense to try and work on all of a person's weaknesses at once. And I don't suggest that. And I don't think that that's a good thing to do. So work with them to develop a written plan to begin damage control on one, maybe just start with one of their personal weaknesses. And this says each trimester, whatever time frame it is that seems to make sense. Maybe that's a good time frame for you. Maybe that's not. Okay. So identify one and then say, this is what we're going to do to work on that. And in your role as a guide is to help them figure out what they need to do to reduce the impact of each personal weakness and hold them accountable for making the necessary progress. I think that accountability is such a big piece because I know, and I'll be the first to admit, when I have somebody who I know is going to hold me accountable, whether that's for a goal that's been set or whatever the situation is, and maybe it's just that I just don't want to let other people down, having somebody there to help me with that accountability is so very important. All right, so we've developed a written plan, and now we're going to try to determine our progress, right? It says individuals don't usually eliminate or even do major damage control on weaknesses overnight. We know that more than likely this is not going to be something that just like a light switches on and off overnight. So we need to all recognize that the process will take a while and learn to take some measurements along the way to find out if they are making progress towards achieving their goals. Okay, so again, if we've identified, we have a clearly written plan, and then I would say for sure, if you see these things happening, if you see that they're really making an effort, then by all means you have to let them know that you see what they're doing, right? Because this is a process and it's not going to happen overnight. But they need to want it, and they have to want to make the change and want to work on these weaknesses. And then the last step that we have here, number 5, is you know what? We're going to adjust the plan as needed. Nothing has to be so black and white that there's no room for any adjustments, right? So helping your participant understand that to make the most of their career, they need to just be committed to lifelong improvement. And maybe today we start with identifying one weakness and working on that. And then you know what, maybe whatever that time frame is, we say we're gonna maybe start on another one, 3 months, 6 months, whatever that might be down the road. We can make adjustments to the plan if we need to, but we have to commit that we are at least going to start and we're going to have a plan. It says not every goal that they set will be accomplished and not every plan will be successful. And we know that's life, right? That's how it goes. But step 5 here is really about the fine tuning needed to just feel like we are continuing to keep moving forward, that we're committed to lifelong improvement. Every year is better than how you began it. Not every plan is going to be successful. Not every goal is going to be met, but we're going to be committed to continuing to have this conversation, right? And always moving the dial. So that is the last of the 5 steps, and we have made it through the webinar for today. So we've talked a lot about weaknesses. I hope that there was at least maybe 1 or 2 or a few pieces of what we talked about today that really kind of hit home with you, that made you think, you know what, this is some really good stuff that I can sit down and talk with my participant about the next time that we meet, the next time that we talk. Go through those 5 steps, talk about weaknesses, start making a plan, figuring out what that's going to look like for you and your participant, and start moving that dial. All right, with that, just a couple things here. Obviously on the screen here is all of our contact information. As you know, any one of us, like I said at the beginning, are here to help in any way, shape, or form. Feel free to call, email, whatever. If you need anything from us, please don't hesitate to reach out. And oh gosh, I think there we go. With that, that's all I have for you today. Like we said, your next guide webinar is in February, but if you sit in on those leadership forums with your participant, those happen every month. If not, that's fine as well. Again, thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. Goodbye.